When my son opened the back of that moving truck and pointed to my piano, I felt something inside me die. "Take it," his wife said. "She won't even notice." He didn't even look at me, just nodded. My name is Ernestine, and that was the moment I learned that silence can break a heart louder than any scream. As they carried away the piano that once filled this house with my husband's music and my son's laughter, I realized I wasn't a mother anymore, just a stranger watching love leave on 4 wheels. That was the morning my life ended quietly, long before the music did. The morning sun in Texas burned straight through the air, turning everything it touched into gold and dust. I was watering the lilies by the porch when the sound hit me, a heavy engine growling down my driveway, a noise that didn't belong in the stillness of my yard. A white U-Haul truck pulled up, its tires grinding against the gravel. 2 movers jumped down, their boots leaving marks in the dirt. Then I saw him, Darren, my son, holding a clipboard like he was checking off items at work. Behind him, Mandy stepped out, her sunglasses too large, her smile too small to mean anything at all. "Morning, Mom," Darren said, his voice too formal for family. "We're here to pick up a few things for the new house." For a second, I thought he was joking. The words floated there, strange, almost funny in their cruelty. I looked from him to the truck, back to him again. The sun was blinding, or maybe it was the shock. Mandy didn't wait for an answer. She whistled at the movers and pointed toward the porch. The fridge first, then the TV. Oh, and the piano in the corner. Careful with the legs. The world went quiet inside me. My hands were still wet from the hose when I turned toward the living room window. Through the glass, I watched the men wrap the piano in thick, gray blankets. The wheels of the dolly squeaked as they tilted it back. It made a small cracking sound when the strap tightened, like a sigh from something that had already given up. I walked closer, one step at a time, until I could reach out and touch it. My palm met the cool wood of the Steinway, 40 years of songs, of laughter, of nights that had meaning. Darren looked away, pretending not to see me. "You don't really use it anymore, Mom," he said quietly. "We'll restore it. Promise. Promise." The word dropped between us like a coin in a dry well, lost before it could echo back. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. There was no space for words, not when betrayal was unfolding as politely as this. One by one, they carried the pieces of my life out the door. The refrigerator, the old record player, the radio with the dial that stuck on 87.5, each of them wrapped, strapped, and handled like merchandise. Mandy stood outside giving directions, her voice bright and businesslike, her laughter sharp against the hum of the truck engine. When the last item was loaded, the door slammed shut with a metallic clang. Dust swirled in the air, catching the sunlight like tiny ghosts. I stood there, feeling the emptiness spread. The walls seemed to echo in ways they never had before. Inside the silence, I heard it. Soft, distant. The melody that had followed me through decades. Moon River. The song I had played the night my husband proposed. The song Darren used to hum when he couldn't sleep. It played now only in my head, but it was enough to break me all over again. I leaned against the doorframe, my breath unsteady. They didn't just empty my house, I thought. They emptied my life. The movers drove off, leaving tire marks across the gravel like scars on skin. Mandy's perfume still lingered in the air, something floral and expensive that didn't belong here. I turned back inside, the house quieter than it had ever been. On the kitchen table lay a piece of paper I didn't remember seeing before. I walked closer. It was an inventory list, printed neatly across the top. Items to pick up from Ernestine Holiday Residence. Every item was checked off in blue ink. At the bottom, in Mandy's looping handwriting, it said, "Make sure to photograph each piece before moving." I sank into the nearest chair, the paper trembling in my hand. The truth settled like dust after a storm, slow, choking, undeniable. This hadn't been a visit, it had been a plan. And I had just watched them carry it out, piece by piece, right through my front door. I once had a life filled with sound, notes rising and falling like breath, laughter echoing off chalk-dusted walls, sunlight spilling across polished keys. 40 years ago, I taught music at Austin Creek High, in a small classroom at the end of the hallway that always smelled of paper, varnish, and dreams. Every day, I tell my students the same thing. Even cracked keys still belong to the song. Every flaw is part of the melody. They believed me. I believed it too, back then. Then the accident came. My husband, he played trumpet for the city orchestra, was driving home from a late performance when his car flipped on a wet highway. The next morning, I was a widow of 30, holding a 7-year-old boy who didn't understand why his father wasn't coming home. The bills that followed were heavier than grief itself: medical costs, repairs, rent, and I paid them the only way I knew how. I sewed clothes, gave private piano lessons, played hymns at church weddings for $50 a service. I worked until my fingertips calloused and bled. The only luxury I refused to sell was the Steinway, the wedding gift my husband had saved months for. I wiped it clean every day, even when I couldn't afford polish. Its wood had dulled, but it was still beautiful, still loyal. Darren grew up in the music that piano made. He would lie on the rug near the pedals while I practiced, his little legs swinging, humming along to Claire de Lune with a voice so light it barely reached the ceiling. Years later, at his high school graduation, I stood in a handmade lavender dress, clapping until my hands ached. When Darren took the microphone, he smiled toward me in the crowd and said, "When I'm rich, Mom, I'll buy you a brand new piano." The crowd laughed. I cried. I believed him, believed in the way mothers always believe, not in promises, but in love itself. I carried that sentence like a lullaby through every lonely night, every sacrifice, every bill paid late. Now the only music in this house is silence, the kind that hums inside your ribs until it hurts. I sit where the piano once stood, and all I hear is the faint ring of what used to be. Sometimes I wonder when it happened, when giving became taking, when love started sounding like debt. That afternoon, I opened a drawer I hadn't touched in years, looking for a receipt for the movers. Instead, I found a thin yellowed envelope, the last tuition slip from Darren's college. In the corner, scrawled in a childish hand, were the words, "Thank you for my music, Mom." The paper was faded, the ink smudged by time, and as I held it, something inside me broke quietly. The boy who wrote those words had vanished long before the man in my driveway arrived. The day Darren brought Mandy home, a strange wind moved through the house, as if it already knew what was coming. She stepped inside trailing perfume that smelled like money and confidence, nails painted the color of cherries, a white dress hugging her frame. Her smile was bright enough to hide its sharpness. She looked around the living room, at the radio that still hummed when it wanted to, the bulky TV, the record player, the grandfather clock, the piano, and said with a delighted gasp, "Oh my, this place is so vintage." Her eyes didn't admire. They calculated, "You could sell these for thousands." Darren laughed softly, squeezing her hand. "Mom loves her old stuff." She smiled wider, voice sugar-sweet but cutting. "Then we'll help her let go. It's unhealthy to hold on too long." I poured coffee for her, watching the way she avoided touching anything that looked used. "Do you have almond milk? Maybe oat milk? Just whole milk?" I said. "Oh, never mind." Something inside me tightened, a string drawn too taut. I could almost hear it ready to snap. That night, when the house had gone quiet, I stepped onto the porch for air. Through the thin summer breeze, I heard voices from the driveway. Mandy's tone was low, quick, confident. Your mom's house is a gold mine. We could start our store with these pieces. She'll never agree, Darren said. Then we'll make her think it's her idea. I froze, my fingers gripping the railing. Their words fell like stones into my stomach. A week later, I received an email from Mandy. The subject line read, "Modernizing Your Space." Inside was a glossy proposal titled "Restoration Plan for Mrs. Holiday's Residence." It included cost estimates for decluttering, refinishing, and inventory management. At the bottom, in tidy italics, was a small note for Mrs. Holiday's consent. I didn't need a lawyer to understand what that meant. They were turning my kindness into paperwork, my home into merchandise. Curiosity, or maybe dread, made me scroll to the end. There, signed in elegant looping letters, was Mandy Holiday, Holiday Heritage Interiors. The breath left my lungs. My own last name. Stolen, shining beneath hers like a trophy. I sat there for a long time, the glow from the computer screen lighting up the framed photographs on the wall, each one of Darren, younger, smiling, believing in something pure. Now, even my name had been repurposed, polished, and sold. And I realized then that some thefts don't need crowbars or trucks. All they need is a smile. Friday afternoon, Darren called, his tone bright but rehearsed. "Mom, we're coming over for dinner. We have something to share." I roasted chicken, the way he used to love. Set the table carefully, just like when he was still a boy who thought dinner meant home. By the time they arrived, the house smelled like rosemary and lemon. Mandy floated in wearing a white linen dress, her smile polished to perfection. "Mom," she said, glancing around, "you've kept this house exactly the same for decades. That's sweet. But don't you ever get tired of the past?" I folded my napkin, smiled faintly. "Some pasts are worth keeping." She tilted her head. What if the past could help build the future? Then she set her laptop on the table and opened it, the glow from the screen lighting her face. A slide deck appeared, Holiday Heritage Interiors, sleek fonts, gold logos, mock-ups of an online vintage furniture shop. "We could start small," Mandy said, her eyes bright. "The piano, the fridge, even that old TV, everything's vintage. We'll list it under your name. Mom. Holiday. Doesn't it sound iconic?" I looked at Darren. "What do you think?" He hesitated, then sighed. "It's a good idea. Mom, you don't use half these things anyway." I laughed softly, but it sounded hollow even to me. "They're not things," I said. "They're memories." Mandy clasped her hands on the table. "And memories deserve to be seen by others, not just collect dust here." Her tone was so sweet I almost missed the sting. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a crisp document. Across the top, transfer of household items. Below, a blank line waited for my name, Ernestine Holiday, owner, signature. "You brought me a contract?" I asked quietly. Darren shifted uncomfortably, his fingers tightening around his fork. "It's just for formality, Mom. To protect you legally." I placed the pen down beside the paper and met his eyes. "If you need the law to protect love," I said, "maybe there's no love left." The room thickened with silence. Even the clock seemed to stop. Mandy broke it with a chirp of laughter. "Let's not be dramatic. Mom, we'll just take pictures for now, that's all." But when they left that night, I saw her phone flash again and again, quiet snaps of every corner, every heirloom, every inch of my life. By the time the dishes were done, I already knew. Hours later, scrolling through Instagram, I found it. Collecting heirlooms from the Holiday family home. Coming soon. My own living room stared back at me through her glossy filter, warm, well lit, and completely stolen. That was the night I understood. The battle had already begun. 2 weeks passed. Sunday morning light slanted through my curtains when a soft knock came at the door. Mandy stood outside holding a paper cup of coffee and that same bright, counterfeit smile. "Morning, Mom. Darren's working, but I thought I'd come say hi." I stepped aside, letting her in. While I boiled water for tea, I heard faint clicking sounds from the living room. When I turned, she was standing by the piano, my Steinway, angling her phone toward it, adjusting the light, capturing every detail. "It's gorgeous," she said. "Do you know how rare this model is?" "It's not for sale," I answered, calm but firm. She didn't lower the phone. "Everything's for sale, if you know the right buyers." Her hand slid along the curve of the piano, fingertips tracing the keys like she owned them. Then she smiled, a smile practiced to perfection. "I told Darren you'd resist. It's what makes the story authentic, the reluctant mother letting go." My whole body went cold. "You're turning my life into a marketing story?" "No," she said softly, still adjusting her phone. "I'm turning it into content." I wanted to throw her out right then, but the thought of Darren stopped me. Instead, I steadied my voice. "If you touch that piano again, I'll call the police." She laughed, a short, cruel sound. "You wouldn't dare. Darren's name is already on the mortgage you refinanced last year." I froze. "What are you talking about?" Mandy looked over her shoulder, eyes glinting behind her lashes. "He told me he co-signed for you years ago. Technically, half this house is his, which makes half of it mine." The words hit harder than any slap. She took a step closer, her voice sugar-sweet and sharp as glass. "Don't worry, Mom, you'll still have a small corner when we move in." When she finally left, she placed her half-empty coffee cup on the table, lipstick smudged on the rim. I started to throw it away, but something caught my eye. Inside, at the bottom of the cup, was a business card, white, gold lettering pressed into the paper. Mandy Holiday, founder of Holiday Heritage Interiors. Beneath it, in smaller print, "Opening soon, the home that started it all." I sat down, the room spinning around me. Somewhere on the radio, a cheerful voice announced a new local business launch. Same name, same slogan. I turned the volume off and sat in silence, the kind that doesn't comfort but crushes. That's when I realized the truth. My silence wasn't protecting peace. It was feeding their story. Tea. The pounding on the front door shook the glass panes until they rattled in their frames. I thought it might be a mistake, a neighbor, a delivery. But when I opened the curtain, the white U-Haul truck was there again, idling in the same place as before. Darren stood beside it, clipboard in hand, his shoulders stiff. Mandy leaned against the hood, sunglasses on, issuing instructions to 3 movers in gray uniforms. "We're here to help you downsize, Mom," Darren said, his voice firm but trembling at the edges. "You agreed, remember?" I looked at him and shook my head. "No, I never agreed. You decided." Mandy clapped her hands once, sharp, like a business meeting starting. "Let's not argue. It's already paid for, and movers charge by the hour." Then she began barking orders. "Fridge first, then the TV, the record player, and that piano. Wrap it properly. It's valuable." The men obeyed, their heavy steps thudding across the wood floor. I couldn't move. My hands trembled as I watched them unhook cords, unscrew bolts, and lift away the pieces of my life. Every sound was a violation: the dull scrape of furniture, the crash of boxes, the short breaths I tried to hide. When they reached the piano, I stepped closer, but it was already too late. They tipped it backward onto a dolly. A small photo frame slipped off the wall and hit the floor with a crack. Mandy bent to pick it up, dusting it with her manicured fingers. It was the class photo from 1987, me surrounded by children in uniforms, all of them smiling. "We'll scan it, Mom," she said lightly. "Everything can be digital now." I snatched it from her hands. "Not everything should be." She blinked, shrugged, and walked off. After nearly 3 hours, the last strap tightened, the truck door slammed shut, and they drove away. The dust from the tires drifted through the sunlight, settling on everything they hadn't taken. The house was unrecognizable, echoing, stripped bare. The tick of the wall clock was deafening. The late afternoon light crawled across the floor, revealing empty outlines where things used to stand. I sat down on the cold wood, the silence pressing down on me until it felt like I couldn't breathe. It felt less like a moving day and more like attending my own funeral. When I wiped my eyes, something yellow caught my attention, a sealed envelope that must have fallen from the bookshelf. The print on it was faded, the edges curled with time. Austin Creek High School, Alumni Committee. Inside was a formal letter, an invitation to an event I'd never seen, Outstanding Music Teacher of the Decade. The date had passed 3 months ago. I laughed, a sound halfway between a sob and a scoff. "Outstanding," I whispered. They should see me now, outstanding in ruins. Then, at the bottom of the letter, I noticed a line written in blue ink, different from the rest. "Robert Alden will attend. He asked for your address." That name hit me like a faint chord from a song I'd forgotten. Robert Alden, the boy I once lent a violin to when his family couldn't afford one. For the first time in weeks, I felt something warm stir in my chest. Hope, fragile and small, like the first note of a melody trying to be heard again. "Maybe," I whispered. "The world hasn't completely forgotten my song." 3 days passed before I dared to open the letter again. The house was hollow, every sound echoing twice before dying. I boiled water just to hear something living, the kettle's hiss like an old memory replaying itself. Then came a knock, light but insistent. "Miss Holliday? It's Nora, from Austin Creek." The name tugged at something familiar. When I opened the door, a woman stood there with a bright smile and a clarinet case slung over her shoulder. She was older now, but I would have known her anywhere. "Nora, one of my students from 20 years ago. Robert Alden asked me to find you," she said breathlessly. "He's funding the Teacher's Award this year and wanted you to be there." "I can't, dear," I said quietly. "I have nothing to wear." Nora grinned and handed me a small box wrapped with a lavender ribbon. "He said you'd say that." Inside was a soft lilac silk dress, elegant but simple, folded neatly around a note. The handwriting was unmistakably Robert's. "You once fixed my torn uniform before my recital. Time to return the favor. Robert." I sank into the nearest chair, the note trembling in my hands. For years, no one had spoken my name with kindness. And now it came back to me like music I thought was lost. Nora sat across from me and told me more. Robert had become the owner of the largest chain of instrument stores in Texas. He'd founded a scholarship program called Echoes of Kindness, dedicated to teachers who'd changed lives quietly. He told me there would be no Robert Alden without Miss Holliday. Nora said softly. The words struck deep. For a moment, I couldn't answer. The house around us seemed less empty. After Nora left, I stood before the hallway mirror, the one that had reflected so many versions of me. Teacher, widow, mother, ghost. The woman staring back was older, yes, lined by time, hair silver and wild, but her eyes, they still had light. I thought age muted my music, I whispered to my reflection, but maybe I just forgot the lyrics. I lifted the lavender dress from its box and hung it on the back of a chair. The sunlight from the window caught the fabric, turning it almost luminous. For the first time in a long while, the air inside my house didn't feel stale. It shimmered faintly with something fragile and alive. I decided then, I would go. Not for praise, not for pity, but to hear, just once more, the sound of my own song. I sat in the last row of the Austin Creek High Auditorium, the school where I had once spent half my life teaching. The air smelled faintly of old wood and polish, of years folded neatly into memories. Part of me wanted to leave before anyone noticed me. Then the host's voice filled the room. Tonight, we honor a woman who taught generations to find their sound. Please welcome Miss Ernestine Holliday. A ripple moved through the crowd as people stood. The spotlight swung across the room until it caught me. My hands trembled, but my feet carried me forward, steady despite the weight in my chest. In the front row stood Robert Alden, now a man of 70, silver-haired and dignified, his eyes still warm with gratitude. I tried to speak, but no words came. Robert rose instead, turning to the audience. When I was 10, my family couldn't afford lessons. Miss Holliday let me play her piano after school. Even though she was exhausted and alone, that piano was more than wood and strings. It was hope. The room went completely still. Everything I became started with that woman and her out-of-tune Steinway. Robert lifted a bronze plaque and handed it to me, the Holiday Music Foundation, dedicated to those who taught the world to listen. Tears blurred my sight. It's named after you, Ernestine, he said softly, for every note you gave away without ever asking anything back. Then he sat at the piano. The opening notes of Claire de Lune filled the hall, hesitant at first, then rising, alive. Each tone vibrated through me, pulling threads of my life together, youth, loss, love, all returning in a single melody. I cried, not from sorrow, but release. For the first time in years, I was hearing my own voice again. Maybe God let them take my piano, I thought, so he could remind me what it truly meant. A few days after the ceremony, Robert came to see me. He stepped into the half-empty house and stopped in front of the bare wall where the piano had once stood. His expression hardened. "Where's your piano, Ernestine?" I told him everything. The truck, the furniture, Mandy's deceit. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he stood silent for a long time, the kind of silence that felt like judgment but wasn't. Finally, he said, "Then let's get it back. Not for revenge, for your dignity." Robert moved quickly, his calm hiding the precision of a man who had spent a lifetime solving problems. Within a day, he'd traced the Steinway to an online auction. Mandy had listed it under the description, "Restored Classic from the Holliday Family Estate." I stared at the screen in disbelief. My piano, the one my husband saved months to buy, now tagged with a price. Robert said nothing, only clicked a few keys. He placed a bid under a false name and won. When the piano finally returned, I stood frozen as the movers rolled it in. My fingers hovered above the lid, afraid to touch it, as if it might disappear again. Then I lifted it slowly. A yellowed envelope slipped out from beneath the keys. Inside was my husband's handwriting, shaky but clear. "If this piano ever leaves your hands, it means life took too much from you. When it returns, know that love has found you again." The tears came before I could stop them. I pressed my hands against the lid and whispered his name. "Behind me," Robert said softly. "It's back where it belongs." At that moment, the front door creaked open. Darren stood there, pale, eyes red. "Mom, she's been arrested. Mandy forged your signature for the sale. I didn't know." I met his gaze. My voice was steady. "You didn't want to know." He sank to his knees, gripping my hands. I was wrong. I thought success meant leaving the past behind. "Success," I said, "means knowing which parts of the past to carry with you." Robert laid a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Your mother has already paid too much. Help her rebuild, not from guilt, but from love." I turned back to the piano and pressed one key. The sound was rough at first, then softened, clear and warm like breath returning to lungs. Outside, rain began to fall, the first rain after a long, dry Texas summer. Robert smiled faintly. "It's the sound of forgiveness," he said. A year later, the old wooden house stood reborn, painted soft cream, a small sign hanging by the gate. The Holiday Music Foundation, free lessons for every child who dreams. Every afternoon, children filled the rooms with laughter and clumsy notes. Darren managed the sound equipment. Robert organized community concerts. I sat beside my old Steinway, polished, bright, draped with lavender blooms, listening to their imperfect melodies spill into the air. "Every cracked note still belongs to the song," I whispered, repeating the lesson I had taught 40 years ago. One golden evening, a truck rumbled down the dirt road nearby, the same sound that once shattered my heart, but this time, I didn't flinch. I smiled. "This time, they're not taking anything," I murmured. "They're just passing by." I played Moon River, the first song, and the last. Robert sat quietly beside me as sunlight spilled across the keys, lighting my eyes not with sorrow, but peace. That truck didn't take my life. My voice echoed softly. It cleared the stage so I could start my own symphony. The camera pulls back, children's music blending with the sunset. The sign outside sways gently in the wind. Where music heals, hearts follow.